Welcome to the Future Christian Podcast, your source for insights and ideas on how to lead your church in the 21st century. At the Future Christian Podcast, we talk to pastors, authors, and other faith leaders for helpful advice and practical wisdom to help you and your community of faith walk boldly into the future. Whether you're a pastor, church leader, or a passionate member of your faith community, this podcast is designed to challenge, inspire, and equip you with the tools you need for impactful ministry. And now for a little bit about the guest for this episode.
Welcome to the Future Christian Podcast. Today, Lauren Richmond Jr. is in conversation with one of our Future Christian favorites, Dr. Andrew Root. Andrew is the Carrie Olson Baalson Professor of Youth and Family Ministry at Luther Seminary in St. Paul, Minnesota. He writes and researches in areas of theology, ministry, culture, and younger generations. His recent books are Churches and the Crisis of Decline, When Church Stops Working, and The Church After Innovation. Andy has worked in congregations, parachurch ministries, and social service programs. He lives in St. Paul with his wife, Kara, 2 children, Owen and Maisy, and their dog. When not reading, writing, or teaching, Andy spends far too much time watching TV and movies. A reminder before we start today's conversation, please take a moment to subscribe to the podcast, leave a review, and share Future Christian with a friend. Connect with Lauren, Martha, and Future Christian on Instagram. Shoot us an email at lauren@resonatemediapro.com with comments, questions, or ideas for future episodes. We value your voice in how we faithfully discern the future of the church.
Hello and welcome to the Future Christian Podcast. This is Lauren Richmond Jr., and today I'm pleased to be joined by Dr. Andrew Root. Hello and welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me back. I'm really glad to be here.
Yeah, looking forward to the conversation. So, Andrew has been on the podcast before, so if you want to listen back and hear about his backstory, if you don't know who he is, I'll link past episodes. But Andy, one thing I always like to ask you is what are you watching and what relevance, I feel like you're so good at finding, the cultural vibe within entertainment. So I'm just kind of curious, what are you watching and what are you noticing?
I think I'm going to blow your illusion of me because what I'm in the middle of right now is The Empress on Netflix. That's actually a German biopic series about Franz Joseph, the Habsburg Kaiser. So don't I seem super cool? Very zeitgeisty.
Right.
This is when you know you're becoming old, when you're like, I would like to watch period pieces about the 19th century. So that's one. I guess probably more interesting is, I'm forgetting the title of it now, but the Steve Carell movie with the tech bros, Something Mount, with Jason Schwartzman too. I watched that just a few days ago, and that is very zeitgeisty. I mean, it is, these ultra rich tech guys, in some sense killing each other, but also I don't know, you just see their moral vision of the world, and it's very interesting, and it fits my bias, so I really liked it.
Did you ever read Atlas Shrugged?
No, I have never read it.
So several years ago, I just made it my mission to read that thing.
Yeah.
And I mean, it was a slog. And I skipped over, there's a section in the book where I forget the character, just it has 100-page, literally there's a 100-page speech.
Oh, really?
And I remember reading a biography on Ayn Rand, and it's she spent a whole year, or some ungodly amount of time on that speech, and I just kind of felt bad. And, completely skipped over it, but also, that was the theme of the book, is all the rich people were building this mega city, which, I don't know if you've seen the news about the current administration wanting to sell off public lands that could be happening again.
Yeah.
So that's great.
Yeah.
my wife and I have been watching reruns of Home Improvement, speaking of classic 90s television. So I think it is kind of interesting for us, just kind of, at least for me maybe, to kind of see like the cultural vibes of the 90s. And
Yeah. It's really interesting, isn't it?
Right.
And I can't tell if it's interesting just because I'm old, and so I have like some classic nostalgia for that. But I think it's more, I try to do this in this book we're going to talk about. Like, I think there's something about the way things were in the 90s and the way things are now that there's a kind of contrast there. I mean, they're interconnected, but there's a major, like, I think, moral contrast of kind of where we sit and how we even recognize ourselves and see ourselves.
Yeah, speaking of 90s television, I just saw something on Facebook that I guess Family Matters is coming back.
Oh, really?
So I'm kind of curious. I mean, I spent so many years, I feel like, watching Urkel and Company.
Yeah, sure.
It's a good 90s memory.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of your book, let's just jump right into it because there's a lot I want to talk about and I want to hear from. So the title of the book is what? Evangelism in the Age of Despair. What's the subtitle?
Yep. Oh, what is the subtitle? I think I do have it around here. What it is? It's Hope Beyond the Failed Promise of Happiness.
There you go.
See how good I am at promoting my own book?
Yeah. So I think the first thing I want to ask is just about the title. I think the title really struck me, like that despair word.
Yeah.
It really feels like an apt word for our moment. I mean, I don't know if it's just from reading your book or even broader, like the sense I feel like in society of nihilism and defeatism. Like, it feels just like across the spectrum, like even certainly amongst the left, but I think there's somewhat of it to the right too, amongst the political right. And I'm curious to kind of what sparked that concept of that framing for you.
Yeah, I mean, so this is the second book that I've written. I wrote a book a long time ago called The Promise of Despair. So now I have a book with two books with the word despair in the title, so you can see maybe. You can see maybe my psychological disposition, but they actually are quite different. I mean, the despair here came from the publisher. So Jeremy Wells at Baker, I think, came up with this, and I was very happy to go with it. But really, I mean, there's a sense where you could see despair in more of a kind of Kierkegaardian vein, a kind of existentialist perspective, which you can hear in The Promise of Despair. There's this sense of like despair opening up, but here it's more kind of direct, I think. And when we use the word despair in the title, it's simply maybe shorthand or maybe a kind of punk rock version of just this malaise of unhappiness that's fallen on people. And that's really what I wanted to point to here, is that I think we're in a moment and in a time where people just feel really fundamentally unhappy, and that these have been really hard 3 decades of the 21st century, and that and we see the symptoms of that in multiple ways, from mental health crisis to huge senses of economic inequality to what feels like a daily kind of political crisis. I mean, these things are just everywhere, and people kind of are just sitting looking at their screens, scrolling through social media, outraged and depressed and anxious. I mean, my gosh, we have 11 and 12-year-olds who are overwhelmed with levels of anxiety. So here despair really just kind of means this malaise of unhappiness, I guess is the best way to say it. And as the subtitle says, part of the reason I think we're just so damn unhappy is because we're so hell-bent on being happy. We're so sad because we just want to be happy so badly. And it just might be that happiness isn't a good that actually can provide what we yearn for. And it the more you chase it, the more it disappears from your hands and the more unhappy it makes you.
I was curious if you came across this when you're writing your book. I remember, gosh, what's the podcast now? Shoot, it's an NPR podcast. I'm blanking on the title. Oh my goodness. This is for me not getting sleep last night. Shankar Vedantam. What's that podcast?
You're asking the wrong guy. I only listen to hockey podcasts. So
folks who know it will listen to it, who will recognize it. NPR, Shankar Vedantam. I'm forgetting the name of the podcast. But anyway, some months ago, he did an episode back where he talked about like chasing happiness. Like it's like this thing, if we keep trying to like push down, I remember them using like the image of like a seesaw. Like if we keep trying to push down on that happiness button, that side, it inevitably kind of boosts up the sadness or the despair button.
Yeah.
So, well, I do want to ask you, because I think one thing that really struck me when I first started reading the book, and I don't know if this was intentional or not, but I'm curious, like, I immediately came to mind of chaplaincy and pastoral care in your work early on. I'm curious, like, was there inspiration there? How did that, is that my reading into it?
No, I don't think it's your reading into it. There wasn't like a direct kind of connection to pastoral care, chaplaincy, but I think the ultimate kind of theological construction, and even more so than theological construction, the kind of ministerial kind of drive of practice is similar to that. I mean, this book, the title of it is about evangelism. That's the first word in its title, but in some ways it's mislabeled, because it's not evangelism book where I'm like giving you your 6 models of evangelism. Pick one. Here's the pluses and the minuses of each one. It's more of a book really where I think the constructive edge of it is a theology of consolation. And so, there is a connection that I think you're rightly reading to chaplaincy and to work with people in deep grief, and even the story that I tell throughout this book about this congregation and this way that these kind of lay people reach out. And I'm really essentially making a case for how we live evangelism more than think of evangelism as some kind of strategy, that we leverage on people, and that becomes all the more necessary in this time where people are deeply, deeply sad, that people don't need a kind of instrumentalized strategy to convert them towards an idea. They need somebody who will accompany them and walk with them through really moments of grief and sadness and loss. And this has been a culture that's really been built and kind of, in a hyper way taken its form in the last 3 decades, where you really are alone. Like, competition is everywhere, and there are certain illusions that you're connected. I mean, we have social media sites that say you have friends and that you have connections, but these are all, for the most part, like utter illusions. And so when you do have a situation happen, like you go through a miscarriage or your father dies or something like that, I mean, you will get a lot of responses on social media. You post that, which, in some ways feels weird in itself, that this incredibly sacred moment of grief you have, that you're going to, disclose it on the internet. But we do that. I mean, that's the way we are. And you will get a lot of responses. Like, you will get a lot of sad face emojis on Facebook. But what we don't really have in this society anymore are the kind of practices where people walk with you, where people sit with you, that we don't even really have funerals anymore. We have celebrations of life, and so there is definitely a kind of overtone of thinking about these people who walk and console with their presence, which I think chaplains and pastoral care folks do every day of the week. There is a way that I'm trying to get into that kind of theological and practical dynamic.
Yeah. I found the podcast, Hidden Brain. Hidden Brain is the podcast, recommend it. So I think something that struck me again reading the book, and I'll read a quote here from your book. You write, "Consolation can never be theoretical. It must be fundamentally practiced, is always pastoral. Consolation is one of the tradition's deepest forms of doing theology, and it is never disconnected from the practice of ministry." So I took from that this idea that real theology happens on the ground. And I've often felt, and I don't know, again, I think something from your book defined it. So I'm curious your perspective. Do you think, I think you suggest this, right? That pastors and chaplains can be better theologians than academics. And I'm curious, if your wife's role as a pastor, seeing her do this ministry work, does that influence your view?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't know if I've said this on your podcast earlier, but I think one of the ways you could, in many ways, you could kind of reduce all my work, which, all these books, one after the other, I promise people there'll be 3 volumes and there's 6 volumes. And, and essentially this could be the 7th volume.
Yeah.
Though we didn't label it that way. But in many ways, you could, I think, reduce all my work down to really, kind of, giving, I don't want to say justification, but essentially in a vision to what my wife does as my wife Cara does as a pastor to a small congregation in South Minneapolis. So there's no doubt. I mean, I don't ever want to confuse or have anyone confuse me as a practicing pastor. I'm not in that. I'm an academic, but I have a pretty direct seat to watch this. And it's not at a mega church. It's at a little fragile church of less than 100 people. And it is just, finding a way to continue year after year. But there are these incredible moments and incredible needs of giving consolation and walking into that fire. And that's what a pastor does. A pastor walks into, instead of running away from the grief, they walk into the grief, and they walk into the grief not to fix it. Not even as maybe like a therapist would do, but simply to be present within it, and to testify to God's presence, in the midst of that presence. And I find that to be in a profoundly sacred reality. So the stories that I see and the places where I see, Cara does this beautiful, it really lives out a theology is in these kinds of moments, where you prepare a woman in her 40s to die, as the doctor says, there's no other treatment here, and then help her husband and her daughter live after this incredible rupture and loss and live in the grief. Like, having a congregation, forming a congregation who can do that kind of consoling work, and then, doing it yourself as a pastor, again, to say it again, it just feels like such a sacred act, and one that's just so deeply needed in this cultural moment, that we've just kind of lost. And I think we just have a bunch of lonely, really sad people who are, in some ways, anesthetizing themselves with just more and more social media that makes them more and more outraged.
Yeah.
And that the outrage is some ways a distraction from the pain that they live with, of the sorrow they have. And maybe the church's great testimony and witness in this moment, the great ministry it could do, is simply to walk with people and be formed by practices of consolation.
Yeah, I think that's so important. It leads me to another thought I had reading the book. And this is the idea that I think you tease at this, and I think this is certainly something I recognize as well, that there's this feeling in society right now that, like, sorrow is contagious. It's like we don't want to get too close to it. It's like a sickness or disease. Like, we know someone's got a cold, so we want to necessarily get up in their business, and we kind of treat sorrow like the same. Like, we'll come and, like, give you a hug, pat your back, but then, like, we don't want to catch it. But I think, like, there's some truth that, like, it kind of is contagious. And what I mean by that is, like when we go and truly enter into the sorrow of another, like, we feel it, like, we feel their sorrow. But also, I think, like, it kind of, like, builds up our immunity. Again, I'm playing kind of with this metaphor.
Yeah.
And strengthens us to be able to handle sorrow in our own lives and the lives of others.
Yeah.
Is that fair?
Yeah, no, I think that is true. I mean, I do think that there's a kind of mystical reality into sharing this. I mean, in many ways, like the tradition, I do want to kind of, point out to the reader here. And again, maybe this is completely self-indulgent, but that there's a long tail to this in the history of Christianity. It really goes back to the patristics era. And there is a kind of deep sense that there's a mystical reality that when suffering is shared, there's a certain way that I don't know, call it its demonic isolating force is broken. And yes, it is legitimately held by another, but I kind of like your metaphor of that we actually have a stronger immune system or something to deal with it. And in some sense, I think what it ultimately is, and I try to use Blaise Pascal in the book to show this, is that Pascal actually thinks you can only really be in touch as a human being with your spiritual depth, with the sense of being, of course, material and embodied, but that also having a kind of sense of soul to it, by surrendering in some ways to your sorrow. Because the only other option is to continue to distract yourself from it, or to try to think yourself out of it. And neither of those are very good. And his great wager is that if you fall into your sorrow, if you'll admit that you're filled with sorrow, or that there's something within you that can't kind of complete yourself, that you need something from outside of you, that he thinks that you'll find a great presence there. And Blaise Pascal is one of the great converts of the Christian church who found a great presence there, that he found fire and changed him.
Yeah. I want to come back to that, to the illustration you made about the demonic, but the other side of that interesting thing about like the contagion of sorrow that struck me is, I noticed this like a few months ago. I started working again as a chaplain, and I felt like once like I started like essentially willingly started walking into the sorrow of another person, like I feel like it found me more. And I'm curious, like if you've thought about that, like when you step into another sorrow, like you become more, I don't know if it's like more attuned, or people have the sense that they know you're someone who will bear their challenges with them. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting thought. Like there is, like in some sense, there's a kind of, we'll get real nerdy here, but almost like a kind of like ontological mark on you in some ways, that you can go to the place of nothingness. See, now we're really sounding nuts here, but I do think there's something to that. I mean, I just think of people who've had to live through these incredible experiences of grief. Like they have seen something. They've had a deep experience that forever marks their being, their way of being in the world. And I think that those that journey with people this way, I think that the pastoral practice is one where you do become marked by the sorrows of others, and no one can really bear that unless being marked by those sorrows is also for them to be sacramental in some way, for them to bring you into the very marks of Jesus Christ, and to have this kind of vision, and that so maybe this is also a vision perspective too from your side, like you're attentive more, but there is this sense of like Jesus Christ is found in sorrow. And I think it's kind of both ways that we become more attentive to follow and look for Jesus Christ in sorrow. But also I do think that there's something that you're right about. There's a kind of mark that you've seen something, that you've been to a depth that leaves you forever ever changed. And I think particularly people who find themselves up against that thinness of being can recognize that, can sense that in some way. And yeah, I don't know. I'm willing to say that has something to do with the fact that we are these strange embodied creatures who nevertheless are filled with spirit, long for spirit, and yet can never get outside our bodies in yearning for that.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because like I work very part-time as a chaplain, so I tend to work these on-call overnight shifts, and it's not fun at all getting called, at 2 a.m. in the morning or right in the middle of dinner time, which is similar for some reason when people seem to need a chaplain, always, never conveniently at 6:30, 7 at night. But it's interesting, like for me, like I found like I don't know how else to describe it, as like there's an addictive nature to it, because like I know like when I'm in it with somebody, like it feels like it's tangible. Like I don't know, like I can sense God's presence, and to me, like there's this I don't know whatever better word to use, except addictive, because like I sense like I'm gonna experience God's presence there, and it's so powerful that again it's like it overwhelms the fact that I'm waking up at 2 a.m. or whatever that next day. And I'm also reminded of going back to the point about finding suffering or being more aware. Again, I don't know how to say it exactly, but like I bought something from somebody on Facebook Marketplace and just happened to like said a word, like just said a comment about the item I was buying.
Yeah.
And the woman paused and was like, "My husband's dying of brain cancer."
Wow.
And I just kind of like stopped and paused and stepped in and listened. And I think like that's literally the metaphor, like,
yeah,
of your book. It's like just stepping in.
Yep.
Yeah. And that's why, again, I found the book so powerful and so precise of what, like, I feel like the moment is right now.
Yeah. Yeah. And who knows? I mean, we're projecting onto this woman, but, from a larger kind of ideal types perspective, I think, we could say she represents a larger society who has no one to carry that kind of confession.
Right.
So here it comes, to someone that is embodied, at her door, just the smallest little opening is the sense that they need someone to carry this. And, that we just don't have that anymore. We just don't have those kind of interactions. And even when we have, this person having other interactions with neighbors or whatever, life is so accelerated, so fast, and people are quite frightened that, they can't slow down enough. I mean, here's the reality of, as you well know, in chaplaincy work and others, is that, like you just kind of said, it never happens 9 to 5. It always happens outside of it. I mean, it always is an interruption. And I think kind of in a weird cultural way, we are absolutely offended at being interrupted from our own pursuits of making our own happiness. Yeah. So, there's a kind of sense like ain't no one got time for someone to tell them that their husband is dying of brain cancer. And yet, what else is human life? And particularly, what else is the Christian story other than to have something to say to that? And not even just to say to it as a kind of rationalist knowledge, but a say to it with a presence, with a participation, even if it is only for those 2 minutes, to have a human response that says, this is a great journey, and this is an incredibly significant goodbye that you're going to now have to live through. And that there is something sacred, even in its horribleness, about having to say goodbye. And there's no human life that's not about saying goodbye. I mean, I try to draw this out in the book of the French mystic and thinker Gerceau, who says, like, the Christian life is a life of pilgrimage, and the pilgrim always does this ad diem to God. But what's, I think, fascinating, that the link I tried to make is, in France at this time, to say ad diem was an idiom for goodbye. So the pilgrim also has to say goodbye. They walk towards God, but they leave something. And, if you're walking in the medieval period, you leave to walk 60 miles or something. Who knows if you're ever going to return and how long that's going to take. So it is a walk into death. And his perspective is that this is what the Christian life is. It's saying goodbye. It's having to say goodbye, but you do that within God's grace, within God's mercy, within God's act. And I think that we're in a culture that people are in denial that they have to say goodbye. And when it happens, they haven't thought about it. They have no rituals. They have no practices. And worse of all, they have no persons in communities to walk with them in this. And so, my real push here is to not think of evangelism as an instrumental pursuit or strategy, but to think of it as an awareness that we walk into sorrow with people. And even if it's just while we're picking up I don't know, did you say what you bought on Facebook Marketplace? Even as you pick that up, I don't know what it was, and you get this confession that you at least hold it for a few minutes. I mean, that's an incredible testimony to God's mercy and God's act.
Yeah. 'Cause it was just like I officiate lacrosse, high school lacrosse, and I was buying, this lady was selling some officiating shirts, and I was just like, hey, do you have an official in your life?
Yeah.
And I don't know, I'm going to assume, I'm going to hope or wish, I don't know, that it was the prompting of the Spirit, right? That said, just absolutely. Say that line.
Yeah.
And then she kind of paused and started to choke up, and she said, my husband has brain cancer and he's dying.
Yeah.
You kind of just like let it hold there for a moment. And then I stepped in, and it was, maybe a minute, 2 minutes, wasn't long, but I kind of just walked away, like said a few more things. And again, having just read your book, I said, may God's peace be with you.
Yeah.
And kind of left her at that.
Yeah. There's something really beautiful in that because,
right.
like your prompt to her, is there an official in your life?
Right.
It's really an invitation for her to narrate, to tell a story. Like you didn't say like, how much were these originally? What was the cost of these originally? Or is there any coffee stains on these? Or it wasn't a kind of quid pro quo kind of framed by an economic reality. You asked her to testify to a person, and is there an official in your life? I mean, that's a deep story, and of course, this husband she has, I would imagine, like a big piece of his life was officiating, and now she's giving away part of his things, and this is very, Martin Heidegger kind of sense is that we have our being in and around these things. We have our Dasein in them. And so for her to give these up, either because he can't use them anymore, is a big step of goodbye. And I mean, what a sacred act for you to take these things that clearly at a level represent her husband to her and essentially say, I'll treasure them. That they mean something to me too. It'd have been very different if you looked at them and thinks, oh man, I'm going to flip these babies on eBay and I'm going to make, make $25 per shirt, to hear her story and then to bless her is exactly, I think, in very microcosm what I hope the church can be for the world, bearing the world's stories and giving a word of blessing as people have to say goodbye, and an openness to journey with people, even if it is just for that 2 minutes on a porch. But, I also try to give stories in the book of people who journey much longer than with the church. And, but if we won't journey for 2 minutes and say, do you have an official referee in your life, and then hear that story? Cause another move anyone could make and would feel tempted to make, I do it unfortunately all the time on airplanes, is when the conversation starts, you put up all the things like this is too much for me,
Right.
And there is a certain, there is a move of discipleship that's just willing to let this occur. And it could get really weird. I mean, she could say, yeah, my husband is not with me anymore because a UFO took him.
Right.
I'm just, I'm sure it was a UFO, and that, and now all of a sudden you're like, oh, what do I do with this? Like, there's a certain way we want to avoid all of that, so we don't even allow for the uncontrollable moment of this beautiful articulation. And so, I think she sees something in you, but I think there's also an attentiveness and a kind of spiritual practice you have that allows this beautiful moment to occur.
I mean, it's kind of hilarious being on the other side of how so many people just can't handle grief. Like, I'm thinking of something a month or two ago where I was called into the hospital for a really tragic young man died unexpectedly. And like, there's a nurse, like the family's literally like weeping over this young man's body, and the nurse is like walking around restocking the room. Yeah, there could be, I think, like a very, but that's kind of how we treat it. Like, people don't know what to do. Like, I was just in O'Hare in a layover yesterday, and I just happened to overhear, like, right next to me, this guy, I think it was a pilot, like, saying on the phone, telling someone else that I think the other pilot had trauma dumped on him, that his wife was having an affair.
This isn't funny. I don't know why I'm laughing, but that just seems,
Well, it points to a point you made in the book about people having nobody, and they have to like pay somebody to share in their pain that you talked about in the book. I mean, you don't call it, but it is, BetterHelp.
Yep. I will say, I said earlier, I only listen to hockey podcasts, but I also do listen to The Rest is History. And they are always advertising better help on it. So that was the inspiration for the pseudo,
right.
I hid the identity of BetterHelp with a character, but
protect the innocent.
Yeah. But I mean, you do think about BetterHelp, and this isn't like to be negative towards therapy or the psychoanalytic or biological psychiatric practice or anything like that. But it is really, really fascinating that, now in those commercials particularly, it's like allow you to quickly get what you need. Like there's a certain sense, like the app allows for a frictionless, if you will, like therapeutic experience in the way that they sell it on a lot of these podcasts, which I tried to play up, in the book, is that it really is a way to help you work on yourself. Have you ever been stuck? I mean, this isn't a kind of sense like there's a sickness that you have to deal with. It's kind of like you just need someone to talk to help you hack your way out of these issues. And again, to me, that just reflects how lonely we are, like that people's friends don't have time to listen to them talk about that, or, or people don't want to burden their friends or their family with that, or that people are just utterly isolated that way. So why not, use an app or a chatbot to get some advice on how to deal with, your tensions with the girlfriend you've had for 2 months or something, or to deal with the fact that you have a hard time with commitment and that you can feel yourself already pulling away from this girlfriend. Like, and that has something to do with your relationship with your mother, but, you would just like some quick life hacks to get through that. And, people, even the kind of long road of psychotherapy, like Freud just kind of felt like you couldn't get better, but you could talk this out for a long time and kind of stabilize yourself, but that you'll always have to deal with the kind of existential tensions. We just want it to be fixed in some way. And if big tech can fix it for us, let's go that route.
Well, let's take a quick break here and let's come back with some closing questions. I do want to ask about the demonic, as you call it in your book, and the idea was intriguing because I think you talk about there's two things I want to explore here quickly here as we wrap up. Like the entering sorrow alone can be demonic, and I was thinking about this similarly. I don't know if you even thought to this as suffering alone can be demonic too. I don't know if you'd make that connection, but that's what came to me. And then I was also thinking about I've heard it's weird, this renewed interest in the occult.
Yeah.
From different sources. And I'm wondering if there's something there about this despair of folks wanting, we've been so, what's the word? This idea that there's any kind of transcendence. We've been so taken away from transcendence.
Yeah.
Right. Within Christian, even religious circles, that we've kind of written those things off as myth. And we recognize, people recognize there's this despair or hunger for something more, and they're finding paths of transcendence in these demonic or occultic paths. And I'm just curious, have you made that connection? What are your thoughts?
Yeah. Well, to take your second one first, I mean, I do think that there is an odd kind of thing, is that the more you push the structures of disenchantment, the more people feel disenchanted. I mean, people can Google this. There was a very interesting, I think it was an Atlantic article. It's probably 6-7 years old right now. It was right around Christmas time it came out. And it was about the rise of, demon possessions. I mean, this was this was a very strange thing, a beautiful Christmas article, but one of the things that the article said, and I guess one of the ways they found that there's been this rise of demon possessions and exorcisms is because every Catholic diocese has someone who does exorcisms. But it's not on the website, because I think those people would just be bombarded by Hollywood screenwriters if they were, so, but somebody talked to these folks, and they had all these experiences and told all these stories. But one of and I think this, as far as I know, this is just kind of a secular journalist. This is wild, that this happens in our world. But they do point out, and I think this is really true, is that when you live in very kind of disenchanted times, then all of a sudden, to find meaning, people start turning to the supernatural. They start turning to certain kind of, UFO sightings on YouTube. They start turning to all this stuff. But of course, some of them then turn into things like voodoo and other like legit, like some just turn into like Harry Potter fandom, whatever. But that same sensibility can turn you into going into some, very ancient, some very dark kind of occult practices. And so their whole point is like there's a correlation between like institutional disenchantment and then certain individuals turning and looking at these. So, like institutional disenchantment then undercuts organized forms of religion from a society, but people have to find spiritual outlet. And when you relativize organized forms of religion, and it's just a buffet of spiritualities, then, well, maybe voodoo is just as, well, it is, in some sense, it's just as legit as it's just as legit as Judaism, or it's just as legit as reading the Quran or the Nicene Creed. Well, that can lead to some, dark situations. Again, look at this Atlantic article. It's fascinating. And so I think that's really true with the disenchantment piece. But the way I use the demonic perspective in this kind of conversation around consolation is I do want to be very careful, because there's a certain way, and the Christian tradition has fallen into this, where we start to glorify a kind of masochistic suffering, like where we end up starting to kind of whip ourselves, or we tell certain people who are being abused or hurt, like, oh, well, actually, you're closer to God, and we don't have to intervene and stop this abuse because, it's good. And I want to stay far away from that. Mm-hmm. But that does become a kind of demonic form because it thrusts people into deep senses of isolation. And one of the ways I want to protect from, I think, an overstatement that Pascal makes is where he says, if you turn in and fall into your suffering, you'll find a great presence there. And his story is one of himself, like in his flat, in his apartment in Paris, having this experience of God's fire, and realizing it's not the God of the philosophers, it's the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob that comes to him, and fire, fire, fire. But I do think that that's an assertion, and it potentially is an individualism that we should be careful of, that really to fall into your suffering, to interrogate your suffering for a great presence there, you're going to need other people to join you in it.
Yeah.
That you can't do it by yourself. There's a communal dynamic. There is a chaplain dynamic. Mm-hmm. I just do not think it would be good. I think it'd be potentially demonic in maybe a lowercase d way of demonic if what hospitals did or whatever was, well, maybe this is coming, just simply give you a kind of chatbot to deal with this, and say, you're on your own, but here's a couple sheets or a website and my gosh, a podcast to listen to, and good luck to you. Like, I think that is actually quite a demonic activity that thrusts people into further isolation to face their great goodbyes. I mean, the Christian church makes this articulation that we will accompany you in your great goodbye. We even have liturgies and symbols and practices to say goodbye, and that's what our funerals are. That our funerals are ways of having this great goodbye you have to tell, to put it inside of a larger story, which is, I threw shade on celebrations of life. That's what I worry about, is that a celebration of life actually steps outside and becomes one last individualistic act of an individual, one last way to perform yourself from the grave, that everyone celebrates, instead of saying in grief, this person is gone, but there is this larger story that holds them. There are these symbols and these rituals, and human beings have to make sense of that. And, to connect these 2 points, if we don't have it, if we lose it, if we devalue it, people will go looking for it. And, you'll see this at funerals where people will all of a sudden do all sorts of kind of pagan occult like kind of little practices to say goodbye, or, imagine that they would never believe in the Nicene Creed, but do believe that fairies will come, and visit their mother, or something. I don't know if that's true or whatever, but you get where this is going. That it's really important that we continue, I think, both in our relationships, but also in our practices and shared life, to help people say goodbye and to accompany them as they do. And big goodbyes and small goodbyes. I mean, it is a real poignant goodbye to have to say goodbye to your kids no longer being 5 or 10, or them leaving high school. Like there's a grief that you go through that is quite, natural and beautiful, but it also is a goodbye. And there's a kind of existential pain to that. And we need others to hold us in that. We need symbols and rituals to help us through those moments.
Yeah, I want to read this quote from near the end of your book, 268. You write, "Our goodbyes are the place where God chooses to work, electing us for life. Our sorrowful goodbyes are the only sign that we are chosen and therefore predestined for salvation by God. Those who must say goodbye, which is of course all of humanity, are those whom God promises to be for by being with." So powerful quote really struck me, and it made me think about, and I think you explore this certainly in this book and then your last book about the church in the age of secular mysticism, about confession and surrender. Like I feel like that's something that I just have really recognized the importance of in my own life. Last question would be this: just talk about confession, surrender, and how you understand that.
Yeah, well, I understand it exactly how. And I want to explore the depth of it, exactly how that woman at the Facebook Marketplace, your experience through Facebook Marketplace with her, is confession. I mean, where she says, when you ask a question like, do you have a referee in your life? And she says, my husband's dying of brain cancer. You know, like that is a confession. And there then is a call put upon you. I mean, this is very much Bonhoeffer's, here's the call of Jesus Christ to follow. And your follow is, do you surrender to this moment and where it might take you and what it might mean to walk with her even for these 5 minutes? You still get to have your boundary. You still, you don't have to sit with her for 3 hours while your own children are in the backseat of your car, roasting on a hot day. You still get to say, I need to go, but I've heard you. But there is a kind of surrender of, can you have a human moment with her? Can you give a ministry of presence to her? Will you surrender to where that might take you? Will you risk the uncontrollability of that moment? But it really starts by you asking a question that then leads her in utter bravery and beauty to make a confession. And the confession isn't what we would assume, like, I am a sinner. Can you pray? Right. Can we go through the 4 spiritual laws right now? No, her confession is, I'm at a loss. I am grieving and I am alone. I need someone to hold this with me. And the question is, even for this 2-3 minutes, will you hold it for her? And will that be, can the rest of the church as a communal reality, when we hear you tell that story, can we see that? Can we proclaim that that is a sacramental reality? I mean, at least with a lowercase s, that there's a way that event, that common event that is so uncommon, especially in our cultural moment of sharing each other's place in this moment and bearing each other's confession and surrendering to that moment, was this woman coming up against the very presence of Jesus Christ, who takes all deaths and works life out of them.
Yeah, because there's a surrender almost on her part too, right? In that of, I'm surrendering like some sort of like sense of pride or appearance, absolutely, that I've got it all together.
Yeah, that you might just think, here's a crazy woman who's just telling me stuff she shouldn't.
She has no idea who I am, and she's like, she could be like, oh, this guy's gonna think I'm a nut job. Yeah, I mean, again, certainly I feel like this is your book, the last book. What secularism or
the Church in the Age of Secular Mysticism.
Where you talk about.
I can't believe I knew the title of it. I usually do not know the title of my own
Confession and
books.
Surrender, but there's so much. I feel like it's so transformative, these practices. So I appreciate your work. I look forward do you want to tease, like, because you got another one coming out with your wife, right?
Yeah, we have a book that's will be a little bit lower shelf than my other books, which are filled with so many footnotes because I'm addicted to footnotes. But this is a one that's going to explore kind of parenting and pastoring. And I mean, we were just talking about uncontrollability. It will kind of look at uncontrollability and a kind of release of control and the thinking about pilgrimage as a way to think about parenting and leading the church. So that comes out in September.
Well, I'm looking forward to it. My daughter is entering into teenagehood this summer, and you talk about goodbyes and grief. I mean, and anxiety, all relevant. Well, anything else you want to say about where folks can connect with you or anything else?
Yeah, people can just find me. I have a website that's just andrewroot.org, and people can find me there. And you can always email me too. I don't know if you'd want to do that, but you always can find me on the interwebs.
All right. The book is Evangelism in the Age of Despair, and give us the subtitle.
The subtitle again, I got to turn around and find it.
I'm trying to read it off my phone and find print.
It is called Hope Beyond the Failed Promise of Happiness. That's it.
And the cover is just super gloom. So really,
it is. It's very rainy and yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate the conversation, and safe travels. Leave you with the word of peace. May God's peace be with you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me on the podcast too.
Thanks for joining us on the Future Christian Podcast. The Future Christian Podcast is produced by Resonate Media. We love to hear from our listeners with questions, comments, and ideas for future episodes. Visit our website at future-christian.com and find the Connect with Us form at the bottom of the page to get in touch with Martha or Lauren. But before you go, do us a favor. Subscribe to the pod to leave a review. It really helps us get this out to more people. Thanks, and go in peace.